Okay, how about we just go ahead and get started, and as people jump in, they can join us. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. So this is session R05, Roundtable 5, Enhancing Collaboration in Design Spaces. My name is Janaea Gripper, and I am the chair of the session. And we have two presentations for you all today. So before I give them the floor, I just want to share two things. So first, the session is currently being recorded. So if you are not comfortable with the recording, you can either switch off your camera or change your name by going into the settings where there are the three dots above your profile picture, and then renaming yourself. And then the second thing is that we are also using closed captioning. So you can feel free to hide the subtitles if you choose. All you'd have to do is to click on the more in the bottom panel. And then when you click on more, you click hide subtitles in your window, and then you can turn them back on at any time if you choose to. So these are the two presentations. We have Michael and Anne, and then Natasha and Mark. So I will now give the floor over to them to begin.
Thank you, Janaea. I'm just going to share my screen.
Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session. So this is my first time at Saltese, so I'm really excited to be here, see how things go, and because it's an interactive kind of roundtable, I'm excited to interact with you. So today I'm going to be presenting the work that Professor Anne Kietzig and I did to bring a little bit of active classroom and some softer skills to her chemical engineering class at McGill. So I guess I'll just give you a little bit of context first for the class that she teaches and that I was the TA for. It's Chi 484, which is the materials engineering course for chemical engineering undergrads at McGill. And that is the second course in a two-course stream. So the students first take material science and learn about the properties of materials, and then they come and they take materials engineering, and they kind of learn, I guess if I was to sum it up, how to produce those materials into something useful, to a useful shape. And so hopefully when they leave these two courses, they're going to have an appreciation for material science and engineering design principles. And so I've kind of given a little bit of a summary here. And I think the courses so far, up until when we decided to implement this little project, covered quite well, really the engineering side of it. So what requirements do I need for my material? How do I choose a material? How do I form that into its shape? That's all great. I think what was missing is a little bit of these consequential and final decision-making aspects. And so this is what we really wanted to focus on here. Especially, maybe you'll see, we focused a lot on the eco impact, which was, I think, almost completely missing from the course before this. So, like I said, our motivation for introducing this new assignment or this new kind of project was to discuss the social implications of the act of engineering these physical products. And then at the same time, we'll add some soft skills into this course, which up until this point is really theory heavy. So it's very lecture based. And so we thought we could add in some teamwork, some presentation, and hopefully some debate and an opinion, which we feel would be useful for the students. So around the time that we started talking about adding this project to the course, Anne and I had the privilege of going to this really interesting pedagogical conference called Learning in the Brain. And specifically the topic for this session was learning how to learn. And we each had our takeaways from this. Mine was, they constantly talked about recall. So if you hear things or bring things back to your mind a certain number of times, it aids in long-term retention of information, which I thought was really cool. I know Anne's takeaway was that if you use a creative medium to do your project, to do your learning, that also aids in long-term retention of information. And this was really interesting because creative media are not really something we do in undergraduate engineering. So what we ended up deciding on was having the students record a podcast, which is, I'll tell you, when I did my undergrad, we did not do multimedia submission. So this is something completely new. And the idea is that this podcast wouldn't just be them reading the Wikipedia article, but they would be presenting like a viewpoint, an ethical viewpoint, and thought-provoking questions. And so, of course, this is completely new, the medium. So we thought, well, we'll build kind of up to this. We'll do this step by step with the students. So first, we tasked them with giving a 5-minute kind of more TED Talk, PowerPoint presentation style. So start with that. And at the end, give some debate questions to your listening group. So just to take a quick step back, the students enrolled themselves into groups of 3 or 4. And in doing so, they enrolled themselves into a topic, which we came up with the list of 20 topics. And then at this step, they're giving the presentation to another group in the class. So one-on-one. And I'll just note that because we've done this twice in 2020 and 2021. In winter 2021, we had to move this online, of course. And so we also asked the students to upload a recording of the presentation in case there was any issues with connections, etc. And it also gave us the option of having the students listen to these recorded presentations afterwards. I think we assigned them 2 additional ones each. And if they want to watch them all, that was their option as well. Okay, then as soon as you give your 5-minute TED Talk presentation, the listening group now holds a spontaneous debate based on these questions that were given to them. And we thought, well, this is a great immediate recall exercise. So you have to think about what you were given as information and bring it back and formulate an opinion almost immediately on that. And then, of course, the team switch. So the listening group becomes the presenting group, presenting becomes the listening, and then they do the whole thing again. And at the same time, you're getting some immediate feedback as a presenter on, was the concept I wanted to convey, was that understood? How do I need to change that if I go to the podcast medium? So we also had the listening groups perform another recall exercise. So they took what they understood from the TED Talk and they wrote a summary for the entire class to read. And we did that on the My Courses discussion board. Again, another opportunity for recall. And also another opportunity for the presenting groups to know whether their key message was conveyed properly or not, and how they could adjust. So as I said, we assigned the groups to listen to 2 more TED Talks. And at this point, we gave them the task of giving some constructive criticism on the discussion board as well on how this could be improved, especially as we're now getting closer to where you actually record your podcast. So at this point, theoretically, as a presenting group, you've had a couple of opportunities to understand how an audience views the information you're given. And then we did another little step here of creativity, recall, and we had the class prepare mind maps on how all these concepts link together. And I'll get to the list here and you can kind of see maybe already in your mind, you're thinking, oh, these kind of link this way and this way. And then, as I said, they're recording the podcast. And then we did one more final recall exercise where we had them complete a quiz after listening to all the podcasts on topics within those. Okay, so just to go briefly over the assigned topics, I know there's 20 here, but I can generally group them together just so you have an idea of what we're talking about, what kind of things we wanted the students to talk about. So it could be along the lines of, what do we do with the material at the end of its life? It could be a little bit more about what do we do about different input materials. So we have the conflict materials here, different VOCs. And then we had some topics which were a little bit more high level policy based. And then we had some interesting ones on what is the role of the engineer in all of this versus the role of the consumer. And then a couple more policy ones. This one, recycling policies in Canada versus the world, we thought was kind of interesting. I guess what we want to get here is is different geographies. How does that affect how an engineer would do their job ethically? And yeah, and then just kind of these other ones that we thought were interesting. So is it always better to make a new product or recycle an old one? What about replacing some materials engineering steps with robotics? So maybe this little catch-all at the end. So just to give you an idea of what we wanted students to talk about. So as I said, we've done this assignment twice now, and we've gotten feedback from the students on this assignment twice. And we have this kind of interesting thing where we've done it once in person and once online. So I kind of want to share with you our feedback from that. So we asked the students, excuse me, did doing a podcast help you versus doing just like a written assignment? In 2020, I think the vast majority agreed. They loved doing something different, and we got comments back that we loved that it was not a written assignment. In 2021, it's much more mixed, which I don't know, like when we actually sat down to talk about would we change anything, well, we thought, oh, this is an electronic submission. You're recording on a computer anyway. What would that change? But apparently it did change something for the students having to be online. We suspect that maybe it's just an overload of digital assignments this year. This one wasn't so different anymore. It was just another one we had to do in a group and submit. So that's kind of interesting. We asked whether they learned a lot by recording their podcast. Again, I think maybe the tedium of doing it online, which we didn't really expect to be a huge deal, but much more mixed reaction this year than last year. By listening to other groups' podcasts, kind of mixed, but I think that that's kind of interesting that there is some positive skew there, that by listening to the other podcasts in the group, they learned something from it. Help me gain an appreciation for social implications of materials engineering. This one is overwhelmingly positive, which I think is really great. That the overall goal of our assignment, I think, was met. Yeah, so that's really, really awesome. The recall exercises were also kind of mixed. Yeah, I think maybe a lot of steps within the assignment, so maybe this got a little bit frustrating. Helpful feedback from the peer review exercise. So again, maybe a little bit mixed. Of course, students are going to give different amounts of effort into peer reviews, so maybe that's where that comes down to. And whether I gave them meaningful feedback. 2021 didn't agree quite as much, but that's okay. Yeah, and then finally, that is this social implications thing, ethical, professional practice of engineering, is this relevant for a course like Chi 44? And we got overwhelming positive feedback, so I think that that's really cool. So I just want to share with you just a few, just to wrap up, just a few quotes from, because we gave them the option to write a little text, like what was the most positive aspect. And we got things like the creative aspect was great, and it actually helped me retain information. This student looked forward to listening to other groups. Again, that the topics were relevant and interesting, and kind of makes them feel, as a student, they're connected to the industry and the world. I think this one was a really interesting comment in that forcing them to do an audio only presentation or submission forced the student to really think about conveying that information, rather than, you know, maybe in a written submission, you can hide behind formatting, you can hide behind figures. Here, I guess they had to really think about how to do this just with audio. And this person got to practice their skills that they normally wouldn't have. So I think that's kind of interesting. And now to get to the negatives. They did not like having to listen to so many podcasts of 15 minutes in length. So that that one we got over and over and over again, which, I mean, maybe is fair, because probably in a written assignment, you wouldn't have to read the entire class's submission, right? So there's that. Interesting is that there was definitely a spectrum of quality in terms of like the audio itself of the podcast. That was frustrating for some of the students. And I think maybe especially this year, that was one of the comments we got back, is they tended to make this podcast as a Zoom recording. And of course, that kind of depends on how good your internet connection is, right? So something we didn't think about for this, for the pandemic related issues. The student did like that there were so many steps, really time consuming, although I will say that this wasn't worth just like 2%. This was like a project that had a decent weighting within the class. So I think it warranted the effort put in. And yeah, so I already kind of covered that they had frustration this year. So that is the end of like my formal presentation. I think I'll hand it off to Natasha and then we'll come back together and do a big roundtable. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah. And I invite you to ask questions either in the chat or, I don't know, raise your hand or however it works, but I'd love to discuss more.
Michael, you do have one quick question, it seems,
Okay.
from Lilia. I believe she just raised her hand as well, but she was just wondering how large the groups were.
Okay, that's a great question. So the class is around 80 students, and we did groups of 3 to 4. So there were 20 groups in total.
Thank you.
I also see Eric Francarov's hand up. There's no problem, Michael, taking small questions now that are pertinent to your talk, and then we can chat.
So Eric, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we're thinking of going that way too, in a class that's different. It's the material, material engineering. But did how should I put it? The technical aspect of producing a podcast, was that something that the student were uncomfortable about, or was it something you had to provide the students some clues to achieve, or basically the student said, yeah, fine, we know how to do that, you don't have to worry about it?
Okay, so in the handout, I gave a couple of links on how you could do it. I gave links on a few podcasts, scientific podcasts specifically, on which I thought were really well done. So I think NASA has one, if I remember. NPR maybe does a weekly scientific podcast. So I gave some examples on this is what a good podcast is. And then I also gave links to software that they could use. But beyond that, I didn't really give a lot of information on how to specifically like edit audio. And I didn't get any questions about it. So I guess these students just kind of knew what to do. Record this audio and kind of edit it down a little bit. We got some really, really good submissions, like really well done, like background music, intro music. Some did like a fake commercial halfway through. Like they took it and ran with it. I mean, you could see the students that were really happy to have like this creative outlet, maybe, right? So I think just these students are so used to working with a computer that it's fine.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, I have a quick question for you and Anne. So I love the idea of the kind of forced, call it audience perspective that they get while watching a team kind of debate. Now, so the listening group, you had them do a debate. Was this private or kind of open to the group that just presented? And in either case, did you see any reluctance of students to speak up within that activity?
That's a great question. So the first year we did it, it was done in the classroom, and we didn't really give any further instructions beyond have these debate questions at the end of your slides and hold a debate. And it was done in front of the listening group. So you're right there at the table. This year, we actually had them assign pro-con stance as well, so that it wasn't this waiting, are you going to go first? Am I going to go first? What side are you going to take? So we had them assigned within the listening group. We divided them into, you two are pro, you two are con, you'll get the debate day of. And it seemed to go well. I mean, it's tough to say because it was done in breakout rooms on Zoom, so you can't be everywhere at once. But I think that helped just to move things along within this kind of short period of time. Yeah. So I will say that there was a lot of steps on my slide. A lot of that was done in class. I mean, the recording of the podcast wasn't, but doing the mind maps, doing the presentations, doing the debate, that was done in class and tutorial. So it wasn't like do this on your own. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
May I ask one last question, Michael?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm using a similar approach in my new technologies classes, and actually everything is in presence, and online students like it better because they were able to collaborate in the breakout rooms immediately and not feel isolated, while in class noisy, not so much space. Anyway, my question is, have you tried students who are listening to give grades to the students who are making the podcast, but to avoid obviously everybody to get 100%, but to tell them, okay, tell me this is the team who has number 1 place and this is the team who has number 2. So my question is, have you tried students who are listening to grade their peers?
No, not to assign an actual, like, say, numerical grade, but we had them give the constructive criticism. That was at the TED Talk stage, so that wasn't on the podcast. I think that's a really interesting idea, to give kind of a guided rubric. Apparently, the peer review kind of open-ended, just give some constructive criticism, how you could improve this, didn't go that well. I mean, hearing from the students, that they didn't feel like they received anything meaningful from that. And that was also something you got, like, some points for doing that. Like, that wasn't for nothing either. And still some students just, I don't know, don't take it seriously, or it's not worth enough that it's worth their time. I don't know. But I think maybe the idea of using a rubric where say I'm a grading peer student, to guide me in assigning a grade could really work nicely. Yeah, something a little more structured.
Yes. My perspective is don't give up, right? And continue, because I share your feelings in sense when I tried this approach, similar approach, but for me, it's they're filling up one PowerPoint slide for the moment on a product, how they can develop, but also to think what could be the implications, ethical, environmental, right, even commercial stuff like this. And my engineering students, first, their reaction was, what? Miss, how this is related to engineering? It's related, right? This is the first step. And second, it's so different approach. Their reaction was, I'm doing this in engineering class and not in humanities. I don't want to do that. And then, no, we're doing it. We're doing it. So don't give up. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think it was a worthwhile assignment. I really do. And apparently a lot of the students did too. So that's really nice to see.
I just want to add one little thought to that. I think Micah didn't mention that when we gave the class in person, it was in an active learning classroom, which changes the whole ballgame quite a bit. So yes, we will do that again next year. I hope to be doing that again. I'm assigned, well, if things stay as they are, I'm assigned again an active learning classroom. So I have 2 teams at a table. And so this is possible, even though there's noise, but they can all present at the same time in front of their peers, because they're sitting on an oval table all together. And I think that is something that part of that feedback and imminent feedback and constructive between 2 groups, so 8 people, max, would not work in an ordinary lecture hall linear setup. So I think that is something maybe quite important to keep in mind. Obviously in the breakout room, you can do whatever you want because you just send them off and they can talk. But I think that was given in the classroom, and it would not be given in a typical magistral classroom auditorium type of thing. So it definitely would not work there.
Shall we take the last question from Maria and then move on to the next?
Super. So more than a question, it's more of a comment. So of course I'm being extremely biased here because I know Mike and Anne. So I want to say 3 things. First, if there are any educational developers here, I want to highlight how having our colleague professors attend educational conference, they have a big impact. Because again, we attended this conference together. We not only had a great time, but when you see how this kind of things really impact instructors, and they want to do it again and try it again. So I think it's really, really nice. The second thing, if I'm not wrong, Anne and Mike, is I remember when students were presenting, so the TED Talk type of, the other students were taking notes like crazy. It was like just copy, and Anne had to say, okay, stop it, everyone. Put your pencils or pen down and just listen to what's happening. So it's another skill that was also introduced. Okay, I have to listen. And then that recall process comes not by reading my notes, but actually paying attention. And the last comment is, it would be great if one day we could do some studies on how all the stuff that you're doing in the long term, because maybe you see grades and it may not be a big difference, but what you're teaching them are life skills, right? So in the future, how are all these things integrated within the student's future professional life? So those are my comments. So great job. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you, Maria. Maria played a big part in this. So thank you very much for your guidance there. So, okay, well, maybe I'll hand it off and we'll come back if there's more questions later. Perfect.
Great.
That's good. So while Natasha tees up the presentation, you're probably aware of it, Anne and Michael, though, but another venue is like the Canadian Education Engineering Association, the annual Congress. If you haven't explored it already, it's great for seeing kind of like-minded projects such as yours. So I'd encourage that. Okay, so mindful of time, I thought we were gonna have tons of time, but some awesome chats, especially about the Good First presentation. So this brings us to our second talk that's gonna be given by myself, Mark, and Natasha. And I'm gonna put it into context, and then Natasha will take it away, as she was really the driver behind this really neat idea. So this is a project that was explored in the context of the Mechanical Engineering Capstone course. And to give you some idea of what it is, so the capstone, for those who don't know, is the fourth year engineering students. It's a 2-semester course where they essentially take an idea from napkin sketch, so to speak, all the way to a functional prototype. And they do so essentially interacting with clients as a consultant engineer might do when they're later. So this kind of takes them outside their comfort zone in the sense that they're interacting with the client, kind of telling them their wants, and they have to actually come up with a workable solution. So it takes some confidence to, lead those interactions and really pull from the client what they actually want, right? Just because like every client's going to want it to be the best, the lightest, the cheapest, the shiniest, and most of the time it's actually impossible to deliver that. So this class is about 150 students. Students are made up of groups of 4, which gives us between 35 and 40 teams per year. So Natasha was the TA for 2 years, I believe, in this course, and she defended. I hated the fact that she left me last year, but she did a fantastic job in helping with the students. And she really identified an early problem when students kind of ran this project. Oh, the other thing is there's no actual lectures for this course, right? So we have a big problem is how to kind of teach or get a point across without actually teaching them, right? Because there's no lecture. We kind of puppeteer things in the back. So the only way we could try to impart or teach things is through actually proposing new assignments. So that takes us to this talk and the actual kind of journey or proposal that Natasha put forth. So go ahead, Natasha.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks to Saltese. This is also my first time at Saltese. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to push forward on what Mark has described and really place the importance of design into the context of that capstone course. And we're going to refer to it as capstone from here on out. So a critical point in the overall design process is the problem statement. Now, the problem statement is the engineer's interpretation of a given client need. And without clear identification of the problem statement, and particularly agreement on this statement with your client, engineers, or students in this case, may find themselves providing solutions for something completely irrelevant to the given project. So here we wanted students to really focus on part 1 of this design cycle. So define the problem. And a good problem statement, we decided, encompasses 4 major components in a single phrase: that who, what, where, and why of the problem. And this was often a point of contention with students. We didn't always get all of those W's. So I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward in this story. So before 2019, the McGill Mechanical Engineering capstone course proceeded as follows. We start in September, assign projects, clients to teams, as Mark said, groups of 4-ish. And then we ask these students to submit a problem definition report in mid-October, about 6 weeks later. Finally, in November, we ask them to summarize their problem in a 5-minute presentation, similar to the TED Talks that were mentioned previously, to their peers and their course instructors. So just to recap, between that project assignment and their first submission, we had a 6-week gap without any instructor feedback in the interim. And often, unfortunately, many students wouldn't receive feedback on that October report until after they had done their oral presentation. So in that case, we had students who didn't have any feedback for 2 months. That's a long time to not really know if you're on the right track or not. So in my first year as a teaching assistant for this course, my partner TA and I were struck by the impact of this missing student-educator discourse, particularly because there's no lectures in this class. Now, we saw that the issues were particularly noted in the oral presentations, those November 5-minute orals. Students struggled with consistently presenting their problem statement correctly. That is, that single phrase describing the who, what, where, and why of the problem. Particularly, we were often lost in context. There are broad ranges of projects in this class. And so if we're moving from tractors to heart pumps, we need you to really bring us back in and describe why this is important. Unfortunately, this was a clear failing of one of the major learning outcomes of the course, to define that design problem or provide the problem statement. So given inconsistencies in student understanding of the problem statement, it was the objective of this study to better prepare our students towards their problem statement definition with the introduction of a new assignment and improved feedback. In other words, my partner TA and I proposed a 1-page assignment as a sort of check-in between students and educators to achieve 3 major sub-objectives. We wanted to provide guidance in the problem definition process, first of all. We wanted to break that 2-month gap into smaller chunks. Next, we wanted to standardize problem statement creation across our graduates. We wanted industry members to be able to count on McGill mechanical engineering graduates to consistently produce an accurate problem statement. And finally, we wanted to underscore the importance of the problem statement as part of that design process. Like I said before, if you don't have what your client needs in your problem statement, you're going to be producing something that perhaps is incredible, but doesn't actually achieve your underlying goal. So my partner and I became responsible for ensuring students met that who, what, where, and why of the problem with appropriate assessment and corresponding feedback. I want to note that average grades did not see a significant change before and after our assignment introduction. That is before and after 2019. Grades in this course tend to be very high overall, though grade improvement was not the reason we were implementing the assignment anyway. We were more interested in that anecdotal feedback. Were students more consistent with their problem statements? Did they improve their understanding of their clients' needs? So given very frank discussions with teaching staff, assistants, and associated professors with the course, the understanding of the problem statement, we believe, did improve as appreciated throughout the course. Now, I want to bring this into a couple case studies. I looked into the individual projects we saw throughout the year, and I found that there were no trends actually to be seen between a poor problem statement assignment and poor final grades, or in other case, a strong problem statement and a strong project. But some of the top performing teams presented with some of the worst problem statements at the beginning of the year, and the reverse was true. We had some of the poorest teams present well-written problem statements. So though a good problem statement does not guarantee a good project, by providing that formative feedback, we did support those earnest, hardworking teams who relied on that feedback to improve their projects throughout the year. Perhaps we would not have had as many top performing teams if we had not had that opportunity to provide them some feedback. So in conclusion, the importance of the problem statement in engineering was stressed and standardized across our graduates, thus better meeting student learning outcomes given at the outset of the course. It is of greater interest, especially in engineering, to prepare students for the industry rather than just adjust their final grades. Therefore, we do recommend to maintain this assignment with an emphasis on formative feedback, not just those grades that are going to be brushed aside by students the next day. I am happy to say that even after my partner TA and I left the class, the assignment was repeated in the coming academic year. And they actually were really happy to see what was going on in these students' projects before going to further grading opportunities. In the future, now there's a lot of work still to be done here. I would love to discuss and love to get some feedback from people in today's group if it is of interest to request individual rather than group-based submissions. Now, this would be to guarantee all of our team members understand the client's wishes equally. It's no secret that group projects can be very frustrating. You often have one team member who's carried a little bit. And so this is kind of a checkpoint just to say, okay, all of the team members are on the same playing field, know what's going on in the project at the bare minimum. And it's just an opportunity to really hold everybody accountable. We also anticipate surveying and having brief interviews with both students and our project advisors to see if there are other ways or areas we can improve problem definitions in these client-based design projects. These are so indicative of industry. We'd really like to make sure that our students are successful in the classroom already. Our takeaway, however, is that even in these higher level courses, again, this is a final year student-driven course, we have to provide formative feedback to better guide our students and ensure graduates have proven themselves in their learning outcomes prior to entering that critical industry. Therefore, I'd like to end there and open up the floor to discourse on our presentation or Michael and Anne's. Thank you so much.
Yes, great job.
Thank you, Natasha, for a nice presentation. I have one question. Do you, in your capstone project, did you have peer review among the team members? And from there, were you able to figure out who pulled the group, who understood more of the problem statement or not? Or like, I don't know, but could you tailor maybe a peer review question in the direction that you could figure out how well each individual got the problem?
That's a great point, and absolutely, we do have peer reviews both semesters. This is an 8-month course, so we have it in December and as well as in April. The problem is these students get to make their own teams, so there's sometimes with their friends, you don't want to say something that is going to put someone's grade at risk. So I think having the objective assignment, making it individual, puts that opus on the instructors. They are going to see who is really lacking or is strong in that regard. But I totally agree, you need peer reviews to make sure everybody's on track.
If I may, great. I mean, this very interesting, 2 presentations. I got to admit, I teach social sciences in an engineering school, so there lies the connection. Maria, you're the one who turned me on to How to Change the World, which is, Maria can tell you more about it. But and I found that the whole idea of the problem statement is a very, very interesting learning actually opportunity for the students, and we're actually introducing that in my class, but more on the side of the stakeholders, how to identify the different stakeholders. And I think it's great. Which probably, it's a comment, not a question, raises the question of how well prepared are the students, in the sense that it's a capstone project. So the way I see it is, have they been prepared before that? Is there material or learnings they bring into this course which can help create a problem statement? I've decided to do that in my course because I realize that although as imperfect the exercise will be, it will provide them with some tools to when they get to their own capstone project. And I got to admit, I don't know how it's done exactly here, if they use the same approach. So going back into the curriculum of the students, you think there'd be points where there can be intervention that would help the students once they get to the capstone to develop a better problem statement?
So Eric, if I could maybe take the lead on this. So I appreciate your answer and of course your perspective. I would love to see how you kind of frame the process of creating a problem statement. And in social studies, we can maybe chat offline about that, but I'm definitely interested.
Oh, we can talk
for
about
us.
yeah.
So we could, I'll take down your name and I'll reach out after. But in regard to your question, for us within engineering, this is the fourth design-oriented course. So we have conceptual design, we have graphics design, machine element design, and then there's this one. So in particular, the process of creating an appropriate problem statement is introduced in the first of the four. They're reminded throughout, and then we have within our course handbook a description. But even at that, you know, it's an incredibly complex thing, and it depends with which frame of mindset you approach, you know, creating a problem statement. That's a debate on its own, but we hope to kind of create the framework to enable them to come up with a problem statement, but we still saw the need to go the extra step, as Natasha put forth.
Well, a problem statement is it's a very open-ended endeavor. I mean, and how should I put it? It's hard to describe exactly how to do a problem statement. When you see a good one, you recognize it as good, but how do you get there exactly? I think that's the way I see it. And I recognize the difficulty of yeah, I think it's almost, I'm going to say an art in some ways. But anyway, yeah, good. Yeah, it'd be nice to discuss about it. I
agree. There's a great book. It's called Framing Innovation. I don't know if you've read it, but it speaks about creating a problem statement from different perspectives, and not only purely from a mechanistic point of view, but also policies. And it's fantastic. It's my favorite. As a geek, it's my favorite problem statement geek book. So I recommend it.
I'm checking it out right away, you know.
Please add it to the chat. That would be great for everyone to know after. I believe Maria had her hand.
Yeah, I had my hand. I forgot what I was going to ask, but one comment, and I really like Natasha, when you said that a good problem statement is not necessarily the best, a good project, at least, or when you have a good problem statement at the beginning, and I agree with what Eric was saying. We participated in this project called How to Change the World, and students took days, or like 3 days, to come up with a problem statement with a challenge, like a worldwide challenge. What we learned is, and maybe that goes to what you're saying, is that when you have a problem statement since the beginning, it is because you're thinking on what the solution is going to be, and the solution is not necessarily what responds to the actual need. So going over the problem statement over and over again, which can be a pain in the neck, right? At the end, you're like, I don't want to hear anything about it. But that's what leads to a good solution. So I guess it would be very nice to do not only in engineering, but I think all schools, it's a thinking process, right? it's getting into that mindset. And I know that Mark, you're very much into the whole entrepreneur world, and it's that mindset. Is that you, when you start a project, a startup, you're not thinking about what the actual product is going to be, but it's a thinking process. We need to teach our students that as much or even more than the actual disciplinary content, right? So this was an amazing presentation. Thanks so much.
I love that idea, though, of perhaps coming back to it and perhaps having a check-in even with their clients in January or something, just to say, oh, are we still on the same track? And I totally agree too with the open-endedness that students tend to build their problem statements with, as you say, the end solution in mind. But a correctly built problem statement isn't structured like that. It's quite wide, it's quite open-ended. So that's also, as Eric mentioned, an art, and it's very difficult to build one correctly and effectively.
If I may, I'm just curious, because that's one difficulty I find in some ways, but in this process, do some of the faculty play the role of the client? I mean, role plays the client. I think that's the way to put it. You do that.
So so the projects can have different clients. About a third are from industry, so companies. About a third are faculty members, and about a third are actually student-led initiatives, such as student design teams.
Okay.
Now, the important thing is every team. So if it's a industry or a student-led project, those teams are in addition assigned an advisor who is a faculty member to kind of coax them along the way and assist in the background.
Perhaps if I may pivot, I actually had a question for the other group. If you guys saw an impact, or if you had impressions from your students, whether they enjoyed doing the podcast versus the live presentations. Live presentations are very common. I've never heard of podcast assignment before. I really like it, but did they respond well in comparison to an oral presentation that was live?
That's a really tough question to answer because they had to do both. We forced them. It was like a sequential thing. I think the vast majority liked doing the podcast. I really do. Yeah. And we heard from, just anecdotally, these students from 2020, you see them in the hallway or whatever. And that is the project they remembered from 2020 because it was different. It was something different. Everything else was just a written assignment or a final exam or whatever, right? So I think that's cool too. We'll see, maybe 10 years from now, they'll still remember this ethical viewpoint they had because they had to record a podcast. I don't know. But I think like in 2020, these students, it was something refreshing. As I said, in 2021, maybe it just wasn't refreshing because there was so much I had to do on Zoom, and this is just one more project I have to do on Zoom. So we'll have to see, and we'll have to let us know how it goes in 2022. If they come back and they like it again, I don't know.
Yeah, I think Mike is pointing out an important aspect here, and I guess probably many others of you can associate with that. But in this past semester, things that worked well before and were appreciated by students because maybe it was a bit different or just using a different tool or something, students hated in the past semester. So things in the same course that I'd done in 2015, exactly the same way, were hated this past semester. And I think that was that overload of I'm spending my entire day in front of a computer and now I have to click on one additional link. Like I had students complaining that I had given them the link to the textbook that was hosted by the library. I mean, in the old days, they would have had to go and buy it and open the freaking book, same thing. But I got negative comments for the fact that I had to click on a link. So I think that there was a certain resilience or bias overall that is not easy to filter out. exactly. So I think we'll see with time how that pans out. Once we do that over and over again, maybe, you know, in a hybrid format or in person again, or when people got used to dealing with things differently.
If I may interject, I'm not surprised by the reaction of your students, because I saw something similar in my classes, and I teach at John Abbott. I'll give you this example. Students who I saw in class, and after that we got caught by the pandemic, and we transferred online with activities, different activities, stuff like this. With them, everything was fine, right? But probably because they knew me before, I don't know. But students who I got for first time, not the winter semester, the fall semester, and they had to do stuff online only, they did not want to engage. They were resistant, and everything was slow. And so I don't think it's a mix between the nature of the exercise you are doing, because it's not the typical one, but also the pandemic had an effect, and students, they did not recognize for themselves that it had. But yeah, so I don't think you can compare directly the both of them, and I think you're doing great job, by the way, and the support you are giving to the students. Don't be surprised if the feedback comes to you years later, because this is one of the things I notice, at least with my students, when we have alumni reunion, they came back, oh, miss, you know, when you did something, it was wow, no, you're not supposed to doing this. But we appreciate it, because my students are supposed to be technician technologists, but at least half of them, they end up with a university degree. And no matter where they end up, they are coming with the same remarks. You pushed us, and we realized that was good, because later we had much higher success. So, good job.
Okay, I see that, Mark, you have to step off. Thank you so much for presenting and joining us today.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Well, I think we're done, Janaya. I think it ended at 4:30, no?
Oh, it's until 5. So if you guys still have
okay.
questions, but it's no pressure. We had 2 presentations instead of 3, so we don't have to force ourselves to come up with questions.
I have to leave, so goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much again.
This was amazing. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.